At this moment, the medical, social, and political impacts of coronavirus are probably right around their peak. I believe this unique moment of rapid change presents an opportunity for us to pause and take a clear look behind and in front of us, to compare our thinking with reality. There's a lot we can learn from what we thought before, at the start, during, and what we think afterward, but I fear many will learn the wrong lessons. Trump said several weeks ago that the cure cannot be worse than the disease. He was talking about comparing the impact of a shutdown to the impact of not shutting down. There is a cost in human life to doing nothing and having a disease spread. There is also a cost in human life to losing economic production. I'm not saying we should have done nothing. I'm saying I was and am opposed to the government seizing control. I think we should have each decided for ourselves how we were going to act during this time, and how we would interact now and in the future with others based on the choices they made. Instead of falling into hysteria, we should have adapted. And for the most part, we did. The reality is that in the US, we've had very little impactful government action. Few businesses have actually been forced to close. Most closures have been voluntary. What the government is doing is mostly setting itself up to receive credit for actions people took on their own. However, there is one action the government has taken that will ultimately be very impactful: the stimulus. The consequences of such spending may come at an unknown time, but they are always bad. The damage that this causes in the long run, the various costs of property, time, and life, will far exceed the impact of the economic slowdown we've experienced, and even the worst-case impact coronavirus directly could have had. When the next Great Recession happens, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to realize it was made worse by this spending, and I want you to stand up and fight loudly against further spending. Like most things the government does, this action is carefully calculated. The masses receive a check. Hooray, we're doing something for you. Vote incumbent in November. There's a small business program that will really only benefit those well-versed in corruption, people with the right contacts. You can bet your ass you're going to see plenty of people making their careers out of this, probably receiving large loans for multiple businesses that will ultimately be forgiven. You'll have to call me Nostradamus when many of them turn out to be politically connected and related. Of course, the banks will make out like bandits too. Nothing like government-guaranteed loans to make you giddy. Then there's the billions in spending on public health. All that money is ultimately bailouts for big business. They're the only ones with the pre-existing approvals and connections to capitalize on these public health programs, alongside the loans that will never be paid back. Ultimately, we are talking about trillions of dollars in spending. It's about $6,000 in debt on the back of every man, woman, and child in this country, the last thing we need when we've already lost so much productivity. Of course, in reality that debt will largely be borne by the minority of us who are actually productive. Our societal progress will be halted, we will even regress. We'll all suffer in the long run, all because we had to do something. The only people who win are the government and their crooked allies in big business. Speaking of that, how about you do something? If you've had financial or supply issues, now is the perfect time to learn spending your money in the right places, to live well within your means, to stop wasting money on things you only think you need. Stop accruing debt, start saving. Stop waiting for the future to put in work and build wealth, and do it now. Make hay while the sun shines, and the dark days will be easy. Don't learn to depend on government bailouts, because when the shit really hits the fan, they won't be there. This was nothing, but there may well be a real event in your lifetime that you'll wish you'd prepared for. That's perhaps the most insidious aspect of these bailouts. The government is encouraging people to continue to live a debt-driven lifestyle and to be unprepared, making people more and more vulnerable to each disaster. Between the loss of preparedness and the ever-increasing spending, I fear that someday we're going to have an event far worse than the Great Depression, and just like then the government will drag it out for many years. If this happens, unlike in the Great Depression where most people still had skills to take care of themselves, in today's society this would result in millions starving. The probable consequences are predictable. Blame capitalism, adopt communism, and then hundreds of millions more die. It's pretty much the worst-case scenario, and we're heading straight for it. Sticking with the topic of preparation, it's worth considering that prediction is often futile. You've probably thought about the next great calamity before, or heard someone talk about it. Odds are the loss of electricity and access to the internet was presumed. And yet here is our present upheaval, where the only thing that is normal is all the technology we depend on and the internet. So while you should prepare for bad things to happen, you should challenge your assumptions about what sort of difficulties you might face. Speaking of what things might be, or what they might not be, how about the lies and misrepresentation from the government and especially the media? I want you to ask yourself if the messaging you've been hearing from progressives is truly about doing what is best, or if they are willing to sacrifice human life to gain power. I think the answer is evident, and it is disgusting. Look at them still rooting for people to die from hydroxychloroquine. They don't just love money and power, they hate anyone who doesn't want to submit to them, and we should not forget that. Among the busted narratives here are the "our heroes" narratives. For example, people are realizing now that it's not teachers, police, and firefighters that keep the wheels of society turning. The government are really the ones who slow and stop it. It's people who work in production, logistics, sales, and services that keep the world running. It's also proven a lot of people's faith in expertise unwarranted. For years, and for the first couple months of coronavirus, the narrative among Western medical experts has been that face masks don't do anything to prevent the spread of airborne diseases. It's long been obvious that this claim is bullshit, based on the relatively limited spread of these diseases in highly urbanized Japan and Korea, where masks are widely used during outbreaks. Even if much of the effect comes from increased paranoia and resulting awareness, the outcome is still there. The models used to justify government action, much like climate models, are rapidly failing to line up with reality and continually being readjusted to produce new hysterical predictions despite their predictive inefficacy. Much like my favorite example of the CFC and ozone models, once the disaster they predicted was inevitable fails to materialize, the shysters will claim credit for results they previously claimed were impossible. Do not let them escape blame for their previous hysterical projections. I also wonder about the long-term impact of this hysteria. Overemphasizing the threat of coronavirus may have helped get people to take it more seriously and reduce the spread somewhat, but what will be the impact when a real pandemic comes along? People may wind up so desensitized to viral terror that the next infection may hit much harder. Finally, this is an opportunity to think about how good we have it. Even during this crisis, and granted, as I've said, it's overblown, look how good our lives remain. What hath capitalism wrought? I think I've covered most of what I wanted to, so I'm going to leave it there. If there's something noteworthy I've left out, leave a comment below.